Hello, everyone. That's Titus. I'm Thomas, and this is Everyone is Bad at Magic, where we untap, upkeep, and punt. And if you've been with us from the beginning, you might remember that I'm a bit of a fan of Dungeon Crawler Carl, and we had a little bit of a talk about it. And Titus might have caught the bug. You want to talk about it, bud?
I would love to talk about it. So, off the recommendation, it has been relatively enjoyable. It's not necessarily the most in-depth book, but it's got some cool things going on and some clever things. I would definitely recommend that listeners pick it up. It is more mature, so just be aware of that when reading the title. But I believe there's about 6 or 7 books now. I don't know if the seventh got released, but the author, I believe, is going to do 10 altogether. And so far, the first book, which is Dungeon Crawler Carl, and then the second book, which is Carl's Doomsday Scenario, and then I am finishing up the third book, the Dungeon Anarchist's Cookbook, and closely moving on to the fourth book, which is The Gate of the Feral Gods. Now, they're definitely a fun read, and it's the dynamic, right? You look at the characters and the fun you get to see with Carl and Princess Donut, who's a cat. That's all we need to summarize this. I think, if you're a fan of fantasy and sci-fi, this has got a perfect blend and a lot of humor.
Yeah, they are pure popcorn books. This is not War and Peace. This is not The Art of War. This is a thriller action comedy that you put on to watch with your homies. It is just a fun way to pass the time.
But yeah, it's definitely something that I've been picking up, and reading is something I think that probably a lot of people do and do enjoy. But I think the biggest thing is you hear that somebody always wants to get back into reading, which it's nice when you have a support who gives you a recommendation that you end up just quite enjoying. And even by carrying the book around or talking about with other people, I found that this has been a recommended book for them, or they've been reading it as well. Already like 3 other people now. So if you're looking to get into it and you haven't, or if you're already a reader, that's why I think it's definitely a good suggestion. It is fun, and I think the characters, are quite enjoyable and maybe, relatable. I think a lot of people would relate to Princess Donut. No, no, I'm joking. Uh,
Yeah, Titus, I think you're the fourth person I've recommended this series to, and every person who has started has completed it. So that speaks wonders.
yeah. But yes, in here's the thing too. So Thomas is an avid reader, which is always good to know one of those because they can usually tell you something that's good.
Everyone needs a hobby.
But reading is good, and not to say that movies or television shows or video games are bad. There's lots of forms to have stories told and shared. But I think a lot of us put off reading because it, takes some active engagement. Not to say video games don't, but it takes some active engagement. And it's like one of those things. You just got to push yourself to do it, and it definitely becomes easier. And I think there's a lot of cool stories and books out there that are probably untapped. It is a little bit harder, though, to see where the recommendations may lie compared to movies and TV shows. Where there's a lot more eyes on them, but I could be wrong. But see, that's the thing. I'm not into the book community, so that's where Thomas has to tell me. It is a very good series, and I think reading's a cool thing. And just it's one of those things where you look at like it's a world that somebody, if you're looking at fiction or nonfiction, right, and just the effort and the kind of style and the intent that the author, which they're artists, the author put into the story, we can all tell a story in a variety of different ways. So it's just nice to kind of visit what somebody else has developed and put out there. So thank you, Thomas.
So, what are we talking about today?
We are talking about Magic the Gathering and the financial components or aspects to it.
Yeah, that is a white elephant in the room here because, as we might have mentioned in a few previous episodes, Magic the Gathering is kind of a luxury hobby at this point. There are some cheaper ways to get into the game. We did mention Arena last week as being a way that you can potentially play for a bit for free with a paid upgrade option. But overall, Magic is not a cheap hobby, and there are more than a few people who have sunk in a pretty penny into it.
And I feel like the company is making it easier for more and more of us to become prey to giving up that penny.
Well, if they weren't doing a good job, we wouldn't be spending money. And, thankfully, sometimes they're not. I didn't spend any money on Spider Man. Did you?
I picked up an Electro, and I'll probably pick up Spider. So let's look at it this way, right?
Okay, I did
Spider,
pick up an Electro. That was and a hide on the ceiling, I think,
Spider Sense.
and Peter Parker's camera. That's too much of a tangent.
No, no, no. But even sets like that can have things going on for them. They may not be the greatest. They might not have everything we wished for, but they can still offer people something and into the various formats. I believe they added a few legendary creatures, well, maybe one at least, into Pauper. But Magic the Gathering is a TCG, a trading card game, and it's also a collectible card game. But kind of what does Magic have going on? And it's a game where you look at the play, right? We look at the experience we get from the variety of the formats, whether it's casual to competitive. And I do wonder, though, how many people are into the collecting aspect of Magic the Gathering, which, with all of the content that they're putting out there, would make it very difficult currently, especially if you wanted everything.
Well, I do think that collecting in Magic has always been a huge thing. The reserve list is obviously a bit of a controversial thing in Magic, but has always been a thing in the background because of collecting. There has been a massive wave of collectors coming into Magic because of Final Fantasy. We saw that earlier this year when collector boosters jumped to prices we've never seen before in this community, where they were going for $100+ a pack. And I don't think they've ever really come down from there due to the high value of the chocobos. We did see that frenzy a little bit when we were all looking for the One Ring in the Lord of the Rings set. But the collecting aspect of Magic the Gathering from the Universes Beyond perspective has really escalated in recent years in a way that we just have not seen previously in my experience.
Now, do you think that will continue to be the case? That we'll still see an influx of people who are interested in collecting the game, or maybe it's just this point in time currently?
Yeah, I do think we will see it to a certain extent, but I do think it is starting to fall off from the extreme version where we've been seeing scalpers pre-buy all of the collector boosters for like Avatar: The Last Airbender. But you'll see people at your LGS who are looking to do like complete sets because they think that it's cool to own every card from a set, which I think is a really cool endeavor personally. But if you look at the prices on TCG currently, the collector boosters from Avatar: The Last Airbender, while they haven't dropped all the way back down to the original prices, they're only about $10 over MSRP. So I do think we are starting to self-correct a little bit because we did see such a flop from the Spider-Man release.
This is going to be kind of a note. Magic is kind of always fluctuating, like card prices going up and down as well. Like something we can touch on within that. Perfect example is Final Fantasy. Take a look at Ophidian Eye, and I forget what the blue black Shadowmoor card is, but Y'shtola and Vivi Ornithir both have a ping ability that deals damage to opponents, which allows you to draw cards. Now, a card like Ophidian Eye was already a combo piece with like Niv Mizzet Perun, but, if the card is not super common or printed, that will cause a spike on an older card that maybe was sitting at a lower price. There's a variety of reasons why cards can go up or down, collecting purposes, fear of missing out, limited availability. But another reason is just having something become available where the card now becomes more relevant. Even too, a card may have always been good, but the other thing is it took somebody to showcase how good that card was. Like Quantum Riddler may have been good in modern, but like the Blink deck, it's taken off now, right? And then you'll see a lot of people are like, you did a fun, cool thing. I want to join you.
I think a real example of that in recent years would probably be Oboro Breeze Caller from the Rograk Thrasios deck in CDH. Oboro Breeze Caller was a 13-cent common until recently, and I believe that the foil version of that is now well over $60 because it is a very popular card and a popular combo that was only made mainstream within the last year.
So if you believe in a card and it's cheap, pick it up now.
Yeah, it's not. If you know something the rest of us don't know, absolutely.
Especially the foils, unless they're Commander Legends. Those are Pringles. Now,
Oh my God. My
but
phone
yeah,
got updated.
but we can look at that the collecting aspect of the game has an influence on the financial side of things, but it's also a game about, like Magic is a fairly competitive TCG. I don't know when that picked up exactly in the past, competitive events, tournaments, when it was being supported by WotC. Because of that, a lot of cards will also be sought because they're strong. Now, how does that compare to other TCGs and how they do things? I know a lot of other content creators have drawn, parallels to Pokemon and maybe some other markets and the special versions. And maybe that's why WotC is interested in creating these alternative versions. But it is a game where the card serves a purpose. And because of that, that can definitely influence the price of a card.
One of the things that is actually unique to Magic compared to Pokemon is that most of our very expensive cards are expensive because they are playable in multiple formats and we require a play set of them. If you look at playing competitively in Pokemon, all of the really expensive cards are expensive because they're collectible, not because they're playable. You can play a fully competitive Pokemon deck for comparatively way cheaper than a competitive Magic deck, regardless of what format you're looking at, which is just an interesting point of comparison.
Yeah. And within this, though, we can look at the different formats, and there's so many like sub formats in Magic. A lot of people are coming up with stuff. Even Commander EDH, Elder Dragon Highlander, was a game that some players came up with, and eventually Wizards adopted. Uh, but within that, right, the main ones kind of stand out as being like standard, modern, legacy, eternal formats. Those cards, able to be able to use reserve list cards within legacy. That's also a problem that Commander has. Won't see reprints of the reserved list cards. Not to say that that may not happen. Legal agreements. Who knows what WotC or Hasbro does? There are alternatives. I've had a local person show me that I believe it was Drop of Honey and Periphery Nodes are kind of a similar card. Just one is green and one is white, and one is reserve list and one is not.
Yeah, a lot of the cards that I think we will see that kind of skirt the reserve list agreement will be made for 4 player. Um, But the most recent one that comes to mind is the workaround for Gilded Drake being Volatile Storm Drake, which is the energy version of the card.
And there the that does it shares a similar effect with Gilded Drake, but Volatile Storm Drake has additional utility. They are different cards that can function in a similar way. And I mean, there's workarounds within that, right? And that's to talk about the game that you can find an adjustment. I mean, that may trigger some of us who have OCD and want it to be exactly a certain way, but there, or you want your list to be a certain way, but there are adjustments that can be made that may be just as functional. It may change some lines of play, and who knows, maybe it'll work in your favor. But talking about getting into Magic, you brought up, Thomas, that Magic is a luxury hobby. And while some things can be cheaper, uh, some things can be relatively expensive. And even in standard being like the premier hobby or premier format that a player may start within. What was the VV Cauldron deck going for before it was banned? Around $700?
Around $600.
In that, a lot of people drew comparison to modern, where you can play like Is It Prowess or Charbelcher for relatively the same amount.
Yeah, is it Prowess? I believe is just under $400, but I don't think that's a super genuine take because there are plenty of modern decks that are around that $900 range. So VV Cauldron was on the more expensive side of most standard decks, whereas Is It Prowess is a very budget, well, a very powerful modern deck. So while I do believe that there are variances within the formats, I don't think it's fair to speak in generalities when you're going to be shoehorned into a very specific strategy just to be able to afford to play a format.
One thing though within the VB Cauldron though, it was a dominating deck where a lot of players were playing it to be competitive. If a lot of players are choosing that dominating strategy and say you want to attend competitive events, then don't you feel like you may feel that pressure to play said deck? Whereas, there are more expensive decks in modern, but you could be relatively successful with, say, the lower end being like, Is It Prowess? Um, or even on the Charbelcher side thing. And I believe Ruby Storm is not too expensive either.
I understand where you're coming from, and I do believe that's a somewhat valid point, especially when you're coming at it from the standard angle, because Is It Cauldron was the viable deck in standard for the better part of a year. And if you wanted to be competitive, if you wanted to try to qualify for your RCQ or qualify for the Pro Tour, that is probably the deck that you would have needed to run. That said, moving forward, it looks like Demir Temp Midrange is the deck that's taking over, and that is a $200 to $300 deck currently. And that's probably more in line with the rest of the format for now. We'll see if those cards spike as more people are picking up that deck. Whereas if you are playing modern, if you don't enjoy the play patterns of those cheaper decks, you're kind of SOL. I don't necessarily believe that being forced to play the modern half of that format is necessarily the same as being able to broadly enter that format.
Fair enough. So the way that we approach a format, right? Kind of what you were saying there is I don't necessarily know about the word shouldn't, but to say that we have to look at the lower end of the spectrum of decks to enjoy a format may not be fair, but it is at least an option and they are relatively viable. Now, they may not be the play pattern, right? But Demir is now able to take over in standard, not to say take over, but at least take a more dominant position because the best deck in the format had gotten banned. There's still bound to be some shakeups with people playing stuff and testing things out. And there is some affordability within standard, but I do believe the price range kind of does go around, that $300 to $400 threshold, which doesn't it's like it's a lot, but it's not a lot.
I mean, it's a gaming console, or back when I bought gaming consoles, that's what they cost. Like that is not a trivial amount of money. It's $300-400 is groceries for 2 weeks for most people. Like that is a lot to spend on your hobby, especially for something that might have cards banned out of it.
Exactly. And there was a point in the past too when Jace the Mind Sculptor, I think I didn't play during this period of time. I think this was a break period. But Jace the Mind Sculptor in standard was going for maybe 70 or more dollars. And that was kind of like a similar case where decks wanted to jam that. I don't know the metagame, but I do remember, recall a lot of people telling me about it, that was a card you want. And I think that's going to happen every once in a while, where it would be nice maybe with looking at bans, and not to say that that's necessarily fair to the players that chose to buy into that strategy, but that is a risk as well into buying into a strategy. And that's realistically in any format. There may have been a legacy players like, I'm into legacy. I don't want to play just the best deck. I'm going to choose one of the better decks. Let's go Nadu. Nadu is banned. All right.
I mean, you're 100% right. This is definitely another topic. I'm not sure if this is one you want to cover today or not, but there's a reason why our format of choice is so pro proxy. It's so that when people come in, they can try a bunch of different strategies. They don't have to commit to playing a deck that realistically, if they were to own every card in paper, would cost them around $6,000. That is not attainable for most people. That is the cost of a not a very good car, but a car. And if these formats want to continue to grow and spread past their established, highly entrenched and enfranchised player bases, something might need to be done. Otherwise, who's realistically going to be able to play these $800 to $1,000 decks in a more casual, focused Magic the Gathering? That is in my mind, one of the reasons why Commander is so popular. There are such things as $50 budget decks, and there's such thing as a Rule Zero conversation, because you don't want to have to spend $800 on a deck to play. And you can go out on a Friday night, you can find games, and you can have fun.
Exactly. And, there's more variance added to those games because there's additional players at the table, that it's not just necessarily the one-on-one matchup where you're getting, overpowered by one opponent. And you can influence the game, talk about decisions, work with another player. Looking at it though, there is always that thinking of like within Commander, the Elder Dragon Highlander aspect, where it's like, all right, we're gonna work together, but as soon as we take down this foe, I'm turning on you.
Yeah, there's definitely the reality TV element of making alliances and breaking them over and over again.
But I do think that Commander allows for a lot of variance, a lot of different things to happen. 100 card singleton. Sure, you may see some similar play patterns, but the game can definitely be affected by the other opponents. And I think that there's, good content creators out there that show alternatives that you can do, alternatives to staples a lot of people bring up on their channels. And that potentially is looking at Magic more from a casual sit down and hang out aspect, which you can even do with 60 card. But the price point and entry into a format can vary. Standard, will shift around, but there's definitely alternative decks, even when BB Cauldron was a thing. And, there may be a dominant deck again at some point, but there are alternatives that can be viable, and you may see a shift for each of the formats too. Whether it be even legacy or an alternative, there are budget decks. And this is also to kind of go into another topic, which would be where are we playing these games and what is our intention, right? When we talk about VV Cauldron, that is a very competitive deck, right? Which you can play casually for fun. And there are people who probably do. And that's great. Not going to, shame somebody if they, like doing that and testing things out. But your play environment does matter. And where are you playing and what is your intention for that play? So I think a lot of people start within kitchen table. And you may not even have a legit rule set and you're playing cards from all over the place and saying how exciting cards are and while you're learning the rules. And I think a lot of people, I think even from both of our experiences, that's kind of where we were at.
Yeah. I played kitchen table Magic for, I want to say like 6, 7 years before I played my first game in LGS. Like, it is the experience for probably well over 60, 70% of Magic players who do nothing other than kitchen table Magic. They may not know the full rule set. They may not follow release structures. They just see cool cards and they want to play them. And I think that's awesome. Especially if you have like one friend who is just your rule engine. That's like the best way to play Magic, especially if you just have those friends who have their 160 card deck that they built back in like college and they bring it along to that trip and the to the cabin in the mountains. Like that's my favorite.
It also makes you reflect and say, oh man, we really did not know the rules.
Not at all.
And there's definitely cool things you can do within that. And there's people have probably spawned their own little sub formats from that sort of a thing. I mean, there's Popper Commander, right? Too. They've done their abridged thing and they found people to play with. And there's a good likelihood that have an easier time doing that with a group of friends. Now, we can also bring up locals, right? Locals is another great place where you can go and play, and maybe your entry point isn't very high because it's like your movie, right? You're paying for a movie ticket and you're going to hang out and be entertained for a little bit. And some people may take their locals very seriously, and that's where you have to have the most expensive and best deck and have on point play at all times.
Yeah, we're laughing because our locals is disgusting. We play in a highly competitive local scene, and I go to be farmed. I leave after 2 rounds every Friday or Saturday when I go to play, no matter how well I'm doing. But I think Titus does a little better than I do at locals.
Oof. Every once in a lucky while, I hit a break. Even then, it's still enjoyable to go and see people, right? Even if we don't do the best or aren't the most successful. And yes, it's more so CDH where,
It's the social aspect. It's the gathering.
yeah.
Yeah, no, that is just for fun. And we are lucky we play at some stores that do allow for a certain number of proxies in the decks as long as you own the majority of the non-reserve list cards.
And that is a other thing too is locals and kitchen play allow you to have an opportunity, not to say like standard or 60 car, and there may be more stores that kind of have to abide, by whatever the program is, where they can allow, depending on the format, the proxies. But and we'll get into CDH in a second here, a specific format. Kitchen table, you can put your paper or write on a card, whatever it is. If you want to test cards too and test decks, that's a great place. You just have to have a group of people or another person to play with, and you don't have to have the actual cards to see if you enjoy it or not. Locals are a little different if you're going to, your standard or your Pioneer, Modern, Legacy. Maybe Legacy might allow some, but that, is more so the case where you kind of have to own things. That's where we look at the having the alternative decks, right? Maybe you're playing something that is pretty all right, pretty good within standard format. In CDH, not every store does this, but a good portion of stores do. It's especially a community driven format where, the community is throwing up these events, these larger events that are pro proxy because they want players to compete. you're probably either going to get less people interested in the format if they don't have access to it, or you're going to find that people are likely to play less optimized decks.
And the prevailing idea is people want to play against a person, not their wallet.
Exactly. So that's the other thing too is I think CDH is great. A lot of communities, they want to be able to play games with each other, which there's a lot of opportunities to find play there. Now, when we talk about the larger competitive events though, CDH, they're community driven. So you have the opportunity to compete with a deck that you were able to proxy up. And when we get into the other formats, though, this is kind of if you want to compete, right? This is the difference between locals where you may want that VV deck. You may want that Amulet Titan or once Demir Reanimator for Legacy.
With the exception of modern and standard, I do believe that most eternal formats these days do allow a certain number of proxies. Outside of SCG cons, official Wizards tournaments, and Eternal Weekend. So even for larger tournaments. And I believe that is in response to the rising cost of decks across the board. And I do think that is worth noting.
And it's good to know that information. You know, if somebody feels like they want the opportunity to go learn, jump into something. But I do think there is a good example too, though, is if you do want to be competitive, though, right? There is a conversation about having the equipment. And the cards in this case are your equipment. Say if you were in another hobby, like a cyclist or any sports where you need equipment, you kind of have to show some investment, right? And that's where I think in the past with the command zone, I could be wrong, but I believe Jimmy brought up, you know, you look at this like they brought up an example of somebody going fishing and having expensive reels. And it's like these are your equipment. Yeah, it seems silly. It's cardboard, but this is your equipment to participate in these said things. The other thing to look at too is, you know, shouldn't WotC or the game stores, you know, be making something off of this, especially if they are providing something to the players, right?
Yes, 100% agree. We should be supporting the stores. We should be supporting Wizards. But on the flip side of that, Wizards is single-handedly propping up Hasbro right now. So they are clearly not suffering from any sort of lack of sales at the moment. I don't think we really need to factor that in at this particular junction. And I think most people are mainly proxying up reserve list cards or cards that they already own copies of.
The other thing is too, and it was on the casting cost CDH channel. They had guest speakers on, but this is a conversation that is typically always the case. Anytime, like players, right, who are starting to get into the game, they start to improve the aesthetic of their deck.
Yeah. Yeah. You're not wrong. I know I have a couple decks that are very near and dear to me that I've put some effort into maybe buying second copies of the cards that I want prettier versions of. I'm sure you've done the same thing.
Yeah, and if there's so many different versions of cards now and Showcase, which has improved some of the prices. I like the way a lot of the Showcase cards look. So a lot of people when they get interested in something, they kind of want to like start showcasing maybe their care for it or, you know, some personalization.
And a little bit of personality. And that's not saying nothing of supporting artists that they enjoy in their community. One of the first things that happened when I got back into Magic was one of my wife's favorite artists was actually doing a secret lair, the Box of Rocks secret lair, which had nothing but garbage cards in it. But Caitlin Sway is a local artist in Denver who we are big fans of her graffiti around town. She's done paintings of all of our pets over the years. So we bought those cards because we like her art and we want to support her work. So
That also speaks to the collecting aspect of the game too, right? You don't have to collect a whole set. If you do, that's great. But you can collect artists. You can collect things that are meaningful to you. And the player gets to choose how, or the collector gets to choose how they would like to carry that out.
Absolutely.
Also, there's the in-person aspect, right? And what we kind of have available to us. And the other thing is too, for the CDH events specifically, but also for the other competitive events, a lot of players do travel around. But the other thing is too, sometimes the players have to travel around if they want to be in person because not everybody lives in a major city or in a major city area or has a local game store close to them. Sometimes you have to go for a bit of a drive to get somewhere. And I believe that there are people that are happy to do that when they have the available free time. But another alternative aspect to Magic the Gathering, and sure you don't get a physical collection, is Magic Arena and also MTGO Online. So if you care about playing the game, and I believe MTGO has card rental services and can be relatively affordable for playing the alternative formats that you would like to play and be a great opportunity to practice on.
They are much cheaper than owning the physical cards, but the rental services such as Card Hoarder, they do represent like a weekly rental fee. So to rent, say, a legacy deck, you are probably looking at like $15 to $20 a week to rent those cards. Maybe a bit less. I'm a little out of date on that. But then you don't own them and you're kind of buying into a long-term rental program, which I don't know if I super am into that idea. I know MTGO is probably the best way to play 60 card Magic to grind out games and get games in against very high level competition. I will say, with my limited experience, the UI is not the most intuitive thing in the world. And it's a little intimidating to get started on if you're not used to it. And that is one of the things that Arena has over it is a clean user interface. I do not like the engine that Arena has. I don't like that it will skip priority and not give you some choices that you should be able to make. That said, I have had Arena for several years now. I have never spent a dime in Arena. I have several decks that I very much enjoy playing in Arena that if I'm bored in an airport or I am waiting for whatever it may be, I can hop on Arena, I can grind a game, and I can then go on my way 15 minutes later. So there's something to be said for that level of convenience without having had to duplicate my collection in two places, which I do appreciate.
A lot of things can be improved, but it's good that we have alternatives. And especially say you're not close to your local area, you have Magic available to you. Even if you have to use maybe an outdated interface for MTGO. I could be wrong, but I think Saffron Olive from MTG Goldfish does a lot of MTGO and maybe more Arena now, but sometimes too it's priorities and responsibilities. If you have like you can't get out very much, this is another great way to enjoy Magic. And other people that are going to be on the application. But there are some alternative ways, kind of the same way of proxying up and even in kitchen table and meeting with people. Online has access to MTG Cockatrice or Cockatrice, and then you can even do games with OBS and Spell Table, Moxfield.
I don't know about you, but I play probably 90% of my Magic over Spell Table these days.
That works out, right? If you have things going on, just to have another way or format to do something, and it gives people opportunity, whether you even have proxy physical cards or actual cards. If you can't make it out to your local game store, say because you work a certain time of the day too, it gives you another avenue to be able to play the game. And it can vary, but that's also kind of talking about like accessibility, cost accessibility. There are a variety of ways to go about Magic right now. It's kind of great within the modern age because back in the day our internet was not as good.
No, it is definitely nice living in the future.
Outside of ways to play the game, do you want to talk about some other things that may affect pricing? And we can even touch on these subjects just a little bit. But right now, there is just an overwhelming amount of Magic being released.
Yeah, I know that this has been beat to death by pretty much everybody in the community that Wizards has been releasing too many sets over the last few years. And I suspect that I am not the only person in the world who saw the release calendar next year and saw, what, two real Magic sets and then four Universes Beyond sets, and was a little upset that they decided that when they were cutting back on the number of sets released, that they would be cutting back exclusively on Universes Within. Thankfully, when there was a recent survey that Wizards received, they very much got the picture that we are not particularly happy with that direction, and hopefully they will course correct that. Because ultimately they are a business and they are looking at their bottom line, and they will see what we are purchasing. They will see us voting with our dollars. So, if you prefer Universes Within versus Universes Within, vote with your dollar.
Make the game what you want to make it, and acquire what you want to acquire. Universes Beyond, oh, it's definitely a thing right now. And I think that this is a company that looks at it's both cool to give somebody what they want, in terms of a fantasy IP or sci-fi IP, but the other thing is to get the financial market or sector or side of something they may be missing out by having that collaboration. Like, hey, we got Final Fantasy, we got Lord of the Rings, we got these sets you might be interested in, and we have had players get into the game excited about that, but I think they're just trying to look at another market to get more people to purchase their product in general.
Yeah, where we might hope as players that they would put a little more work into consolidating the player base rather than expanding. But that is neither here nor there.
But yeah, with the number of releases and also with the different universes beyond being introduced, and also to talk about secret layers, there can be a lot of fear of missing out, especially when you have the case of like the Marvel secret layer where you had a ton of people wait in line to not get anything, right? And that's where you have people that are potentially trying to scalp or just to be able to get access to get it for a friend. And something they did with the secret layer was they made it a limited amount that can be purchased versus having it available for a duration at a time and taking people's orders, which, they could look at. There were some issues in the past with that, but would that be better in terms of what's going on now? Now it's like, why even care about it? Some people still will care. Some people are interested in, maybe they want to make a buck off of it.
This forced scarcity is a manufactured FOMO. It is completely just late stage capitalism bullshit. This is not something that is good for a consumer. This is purely greed based economics, unfortunately. And it works because there's been some really cool products that they printed. And there are ways that you can go in and game the system. Not to date that when we're recording this, but recently the Encyclopedia of Magic came out. It was really easy to snag if you know the tricks. For most of these secret layers, you can go in the night before, put a product into your cart, and then when 10 o'clock our time, mountain time, rolls around, just go log into the site or be logged into the site and you're automatically in queue. Just cheat the system. And then when you get out randomly put in line, as soon as you're out of the line, you just change out what you already had in your cart for the product you want. These are not things that you should be able to do. You should not be able to game the system. You shouldn't have to game the system. It should be set up so that there are strict limits on what you can buy that are gated by IP addresses, gated by accounts that need to be verified in some sort of way, and or they should be print to demand. I shouldn't be able to go and buy an encyclopedia of magic and look into getting a hollow foil Urza's Lair that is worth $1,500 because I happen to not have a work meeting at 10:30 on a Tuesday. That is completely unacceptable for just a game, especially since there were so many cool things in this set that so many people wanted. And I just happened to have some free time and I saw a good financial opportunity where I could get the 2, 3 cards I want out of this and sell the rest and cover this. I also fundamentally have a problem with the gambling aspect of this. We shouldn't be able to have this much of a financial aspect tied to opening packs or opening things like secret lairs. This is, at the end of the day, a product that children can purchase who are not 18 years old. And there's nothing, there's a memory that has stuck with me that has been with me for a few years now of walking into a local card shop when I was going to go and play some games and seeing a kid who couldn't have been like 13 years old with a debit card or credit card, not sure what it was, who was buying pack after pack, opening them, selling the cards back to see what he had bought, and going until he ran out of money. That is not an okay habit to instill in somebody who does not know what they are doing or what they are getting into. I know that this is kind of a bummer, but this is the loot crate issue that we're seeing in video games just brought into our hobby as well. I know this has always been an aspect of Magic, but when Wizards is refusing to acknowledge a secondary market, there has to be some sort of accountability. Yeah, Tice is giving quotation marks around the secondary market.
They sort of don't acknowledge, but they know.
Yeah.
They if we're looking at secret layers too, so there's two aspects, right? You have the lottery aspect of Magic within the packs and the collector's editions, which I mean, it's cool, right? To a certain extent to open up something really cool or neat. And I think that was possibly some of the original intention when the game was, created was to have something exciting. But with anything, right? There's some negatives that can come with that as well. And there is that kind of like lottery scratcher dynamic going on within the packs, right? Because especially with the collector boosters. And I mean, what how many collector boosters do you think were purchased before the one ring was found in the Lord of the Rings? Because there was only one copy of that, correct? So the one ring.
Mm-hmm. And that kid made like $2 million. That is a lottery ticket. That is straight up a lottery. That's something that should probably be more heavily regulated.
But and I know there are definitely people they have the fun of opening packs. That is a thing. It's just like a fun thing you can do. Um, and you know, the game also has drafting, which randomization and trying to formulate a strategy based upon what you pick. Uh, but there is a question, right? With the secret layers, and we're getting certain stuff that's kind of getting, you know, should Magic still be within the pack system? Should things not just be directly printed? I don't know. I don't think that's ever going to be the case, but that's definitely a question, to have in regards to the game. But is it just what we deal with to enjoy the hobby we like?
Yeah, I'm not necessarily 100% against the pack system. I'm not against the gambling nature entirely. It's just I believe there should be some sort of regulation to get around it, maybe some sort of restriction on how these things can be purchased. We wouldn't You'd look negatively on a 10-year-old walking into a casino with their parents' credit card and going to a slot machine. It wouldn't be something that society would look at and say, hey, that's okay. And that's essentially what's happening here.
Fair enough. This is also a thing where this is looking at it as, hey, there's a negative thing going on within Magic Gathering, but there are a lot of positive things. And, realistically, it is what you make it too. And not to say, like, if you enjoy cracking a pack every once in a while, and some people like to do that, it's great, but limitations and singles are definitely the way to go. That's where you'll.
Just to be completely clear, not looking down on people who crack packs. I have a homie who cracks packs with his family, and that's one of the things that they do when they go out camping. I think that's cool. Like, that's a fun way to do it, but don't do it to try and make money. Like, that's degen behavior, and that's probably not going to work out for you great in the long run. Buying singles, like Titus mentioned, is probably ultimately the safest way to go. But I also bought a Sylvan Paradise when it was $60 and I sold it for 10. So that's not foolproof either.
Well, the game fluctuates, right? And this is even talking about in a competitive format. You can buy into one strategy that's expensive one day and super cheap the next. I don't think there's a ton guaranteed. Even we don't know what's going to happen with the reserved list. We could keep going on with it, or maybe it becomes invalidated. But there are a ton of formats within Magic. And, another format that's great for accessibility and has competitive play.
Before you talk about Popper, that contract has to be ironclad for the reserve list for Papa Watsy to have not walked it back. Somebody with very deep pockets who is litigious has managed to get that really locked in. There's no other reason why that hasn't been broken yet, at least in my mind. Either that or like the CEO of Hasbro is sitting on like 5,000 Black Lotuses and that's their retirement plan.
Fair enough. Whether the WotC wants it to happen or not, is that within the reserved list, right? The proxies being like in CDH, it's a great thing. It gives people accessibility. And yes, Popper. Popper is a great way to get into the game. There's a lot of different decks, but also too, with all of these sets, there is a bit of a positive, and maybe some people are unhappy with certain cards crashing, but that's the thing, right? Cards go up and down all the time, and you can spec buy. And if you like playing the market a little bit, you can do that if you want to sell them or you just want to have it. But reprints, Tolarian Academy, reprints. And there are a lot of cards that were expensive that have got, look at a Craterhoof Behemoth. You can get them for like $10 now. It's like that card, yeah.
I hear what you were saying, and I hate that a massively reprinted card at $10 is a deal for a playable card. Yeah.
There are alternatives to that card too. There's like Raz, like the boar that kind of functions, and the Kamal partner commander from Commander Legends. There are alternatives to these cards, but Eldritch Evolution got a reprint and Innistrad remastered. And then look at even cards that went down a little bit. Worldly Tutor went down again $10, but now it's back up to 20. When Dominaria remastered got reprinted, it went down for a bit. And that's, the market can go up and down. A set comes out, everything has high pre-sale prices. Wait a few months, cards come down. The game is what you make it. You can build budget decks. You can really focus on, the things that you want at the time and maybe buy into it. But there's a lot of flexibility too.
100%. Cool. So, Titus, before we wrap up today, did you have any closing thoughts?
Yes. The game, like said in the past, the game is what you make it. There are a lot of options, a lot of opportunities, and there may have been more restrictions in the past, but we have a lot of avenues that are opening up for this game. Enjoy it, make it what you want it to be.
Fair enough. I will say that I don't love that my homies are starting to weigh packs. let's keep that in Pokemon. If you stayed with us this long, please consider giving us a like, follow, subscribe, or comment depending on how you found us. Something that we're considering moving forward is if you have a story where you've punted and you've learned from it, please send it to us at everyoneisbadatmagic@gmail.com. Be kind to each other and be kind to yourselves. It's just a game.